Well, the recording is in progress, so I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, um, and ask staff to do the roll call for us.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's excited for it to be Friday. Okay, we will start with Senator Zolnikoff.
Here.
Alan Lloyd,
Here.
Senator Harvey, Senator Noland. Okay, Representative Etchart, Representative Seconder, okay. Representative Teal,
Here.
Stacy Anderson, Tanner Avery,
I'm here.
Webb Brown,
Here.
Bob Dean,
Here.
okay. John Harding. No,
Here.
okay,
Here.
perfect.
Sorry.
That's okay. Jennifer Hensley,
Here.
Sierra Reesberg,
Here.
and Gail Tronstad.
Present.
Perfect. Okay. Sorry, that's it for the subcommittee members. As far as staff, I will just announce who's on the call. I'm Erin Sullivan, policy analyst with the legal division in the Department of Labor and lead staff for this subcommittee. And we have Jennifer Stallkamp, who is our deputy chief legal counsel and legal counsel for this subcommittee. Lisa Patzer, who is our technology expert and is running Zoom. I think I saw Kevin. Yes, Kevin Bragg is also on the call. He is the bureau chief for the licensing division. And then not our staff, but I have invited Angus McKeever, who is our legislative auditor for the state, to join us because I had provided you with a memo that his division did for the legislative audit division. And so I can touch on that. And then he agreed to sit in on the call and answer any questions the committee may have. So I think that is it for staff, unless I missed somebody. If I did, speak up. Oh, okay.
Excellent. Well, with that, the first agenda item we have is subcommittee considerations, and top of the list there is review the April 13th task force meeting, um, and ask if there are any updates or adjustments to our work plan. Aaron, were there any things from the meeting that you took away that we need to address for our work plan?
I can look. No, I don't think so. Actually, there is something. Sorry, I'm just looking through my chicken scratch. And there, Ms. Tronstad, there was something that you had mentioned during the Sunset subcommittee discussion. And I have in my notes to look back at the meeting to get that information. But it was to add it to the work plan. And so, do you remember what that was that you had asked? And I remember the commissioner mentioned that that was a good idea and asked us um,
I
to add it
believe
to our work plan.
I believe I asked that if some profession was not licensed, then where would the public go if there was a complaint or a concern?
Okay. Um, okay.
Thank
Other
you.
than that, I think that was all that I recall. But there was a lot of information going around. So if anybody else on the committee has some thoughts or ideas.
All
No.
right, hearing none.
Okay.
I do think that the conversation around what happens for the public when there's not a licensing board is a good discussion for this group to have and be aware of. I think there was The report from Pat Murdo that was in our materials had touched on this a little bit, but I think just
Mhm.
getting some more technical idea of exactly what that looks like would be helpful.
Okay.
And with that, the next item on our agenda is other states' approach to sunset reviews. And I see we have a presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Before we dive into that, I did want to um, just talk a little bit about the materials that I provided. So I did provide that report from the HB 525 study by the Economic Affairs Interim Committee. That was a request from the last meeting to provide that. So you all now should have a copy of that. It's a hefty read, but it's good information. And that is where I pulled a lot of the information from last month's presentation. And then just as a follow-up, so Tanner Avery actually was the one that had asked this question when we were talking during the last meeting about the statutory obligations now for sunset reviews. And the question was, does the governor's office actually utilize their permissive ability to submit entities or boards or professions or anything for the sunset review. And so I did reach out to the auditor's office, and that is why we have Mr. McKeever on the line. And he replied saying that there's another commission right now that is kind of looking at this. And so it was HB 834, excuse me, that passed last session and it established the Data and Impact Commission. And so they're doing a lot of other things as well. But in the memo that he provided to me that I provided to you, they're one of their topics is the history of the sunset laws and the legislative review process in Montana statute. And so according to this and my communications with Mr. McKeever, the governor's office hasn't actually taken advantage of this provision. And so I might just, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, I might just pass it over to Mr. McKeever to kind of give a little bit of background from the audit's perspective, audit division's perspective on these provisions that we have now and what this commission is doing.
We would love to hear from Mr. McKeever.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Angus McKeever. I'm the Legislative Auditor, Director of the Legislative Audit Division. This is although maybe I see a lot of familiar names here, and for people who've been around state government for a while, nobody really believes in cosmic coincidences. But let me assure you, this is a good example of a cosmic coincidence. The House Bill 834 Data and Impact Commission has been, doing its work since the beginning of the interim. We've been involved in that effort, and I guess kind of tangentially involved but part of what the Data and Impact Commission is looking at is are the processes that exist to kind of review efficiency and effectiveness of state programs and identify state programs that may be redundant. That's the I believe the term it uses is redundant or antiquated. And so while we've been kind of reviewing the audit division's role as part of that commission, where we naturally ended up were the Title II legislative review laws, the old sunset laws, and we were putting together a staff research effort here in the audit division for the Data and Impact Commission. And then the cosmic coincidence occurred, and Erin had contacted us regarding some of the old sunset reports that our office used to do way back when in the late 70s, early 80s. And we had helped Erin, we directed her actually to the Historical Society, where they have a really good digital archiving effort, and you can go back and find a lot of those old sunset reports. At that time, the Office of the Legislative Auditor was responsible for conducting. So we had put together this memo for the commission. When Erin started asking her questions, we forwarded it to her, kind of seeing that there was obviously some interest. I'll also confess that I had no idea that this task force was pursuing this specific issue of Sunset. So that's another happy coincidence that we were able to kind of link up on this and see what's going on. So yeah, we provided this memo to the Legislative Audit Committee. They're still actively considering potential options relative to those Title II statutes. I'm not going to go into the detail of the memo too much. You guys have it. You've either looked at it or you haven't, or you have questions or you don't. The audit committee, the responsibilities primarily that exist under the legislative review statutes and Title II rest mainly with the audit committee. So we view it as their role and responsibility to determine whether they're interested in any changes that might occur. Specific to the sunset process, there is the statutes have changed obviously a lot over the years. There's been a lot of revisions. We kind of view what's left in there in Title II is there's some of the original purpose that was put in place around the first sunset cycle. But a lot of the detail got stripped out. But there are some things that are still left there. One of them is a kind of permissive process whereby the governor can identify programs that essentially would be sunsetted and subject to a performance audit. And we incorporate that outreach or that solicitation in our biennial efforts to identify programs that could be included for performance audits. And as Erin touched on, I guess I would say living memory, or maybe living memory, but recent years, certainly the past decade, we have not had any programs that have been identified by successive governors. There's a little bit of folklore about this in the audit division because there's not a whole lot of people left. In fact, to be honest, there's nobody left who remembers the original sunset cycle. The folklore around the audit division's role in this was that the first cycle, and again, it was the late 70s, early 80s. It was a 6-year cycle. We reviewed multiple programs, boards, including licensing boards, as part of that. Some of them, were recommended for termination as part of the sunset process. From the audit division's perspective, the process maybe kind of ran out of steam a little bit because the sunset cycle kind of set up a dynamic where everybody knew that we were going to be looking at a specific board or a specific program or activity. And given the kind of termination deadlines that were part of that process, the dynamic emerged where a lot of interest and advocacy groups that were involved in different state government programs kind of coalesced around that sunset process, and this, of course, lobbied the legislature, likely largely successfully, to persuade them against terminating programs. So it did have the reputation in the audit division as maybe not a wasted effort, but a lot of time and effort that was put into something that ultimately it was difficult for the legislature to act on fully. So here we are, though, 30 plus years later. These laws are still in effect. We are working on some conversations with the audit committee about potentially updating the Title II statutes, and that could well involve altering, revising audit committee responsibilities under those statutes, or in some cases maybe just removing some of the requirements that are in there. The next opportunity for discussion about that is going to be at the June Audit Committee meeting, and we'll be kind of getting into a little bit more detail about it there. But in the meantime, we're very interested to learn about what's going on with the sunset part of the task force. Again, they're happy cosmic coincidences do occur. This is one of them. So I'm happy to answer any questions that might be out there from the subcommittee. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, and I will hand the floor over to Tanner, who has his hand raised.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Angus, for kind of unpacking that a little bit. I have a couple questions just to really clarify so that I have my head wrapped around how this process has changed over time. And it's like current state. Let's say if the governor did bring something forward like this, is it more of a review structure? Obviously the review part is always part of baked into a sunset, but to me, when I think sunset, most of the time it's a literal sunset. There is an end date. Once it's been declared that there is a set end date where if their action's not taken, it will disappear. Is it your understanding that it's still like that in law, or is it more of a review function where they review it, it goes to the legislature, and the legislature decides what to do?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Tanner. Obviously, with the caveat that we haven't done it for a number of years. Yeah, the process is more of a review. So the audit function, of course, can't be in a place where we would have any, executive authority to declare a program to be terminated. But the bare bones of the structure are, an agency, a program, a board, or an activity is brought forward. The purpose being to conduct a performance audit to determine whether or not, with I guess a kind of sole objective of determining whether or not a program should be recommended for termination or not. But then ultimately that gets reported to the audit committee. There's some provisions in the law about the role of the audit committee, exactly what they're going to do. There's it essentially would be a public hearing process where the audit recommendation gets a public hearing, but then obviously it would have to go through the legislative process before a termination would occur.
Thank you for that. I have one other follow-up question with that. And I think you just kind of covered it too. So, but I just want to make sure that I fully am grasping this, especially with all the changes and this being the 70s when this was all kind of brought into law. It sounds like to me, is this your understanding that it sounds like to me originally the sunset was kind of guided more by the legislature, or at least they created an automatic review process. And then what happened is we changed it. We kicked it over to the governor as the authority to bring forward the review. Obviously, the legislature is the ones that have to actually make changes to the law. So I don't think that's any debate. But I'm curious, is that kind of your understanding too, of we kind of moved who triggers this from the legislative branch to the executive branch?
Yeah, I think broadly, Tanner, that's a fair representation of what happened. Again, with all the time that's elapsed since this happened, the original sunset cycle, as we understood it, which ran from, I believe, approximately 1977 through 1983, something along those lines, was very structured, and the legislature, established, there were going to be 3 biennial cycles, and we were going to look at this list of agencies in the first one, and then then these guys, then these guys. So very structured in that way. And the changes that occurred beginning in the early 1980s, yeah, it really flipped it around to I guess maintain the purpose of the sunset process, but to put the onus for initiating any kind of reviews onto the executive branch. And with some other revisions that have occurred over the years, I guess that's probably largely where we still are.
thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Before opening the floor to other questions, I have two of my own. The first is, and I understand if this might be difficult to answer or not, but if this group were to decide that we wanted to assign to your group some work to gather data from like an independent entity, and so as we move forward in this process, looking at a sunset, I think one of the questions is, who is looking at things, and a lot of the options are for the boards themselves to present information into the process. And I think just um, hearing you talk, I think it would be nice if we understood if your group could be an asset that could gather data that would be independent from the department itself.
Yeah, I think on some basis we'd be able to do that. Certainly in terms of our history of involvement, because obviously this goes back a ways, but over the years, even since I've been around, we've had on and off work within the professional licensing area. So it's a very familiar topic for us. We're we're going to be doing some work with the direction of the audit committee anyway. So I think where there are opportunities for us to provide some input on that, we'd be fine doing that.
Excellent. My second question is somewhat related to that, but just again, in theory, if this group were to bring forward a recommendation that had some list of items for evaluation, do you think your group would be an option to gather some set of metrics to make essentially like a first round look to see which boards might be more needing of a deeper dig, so that instead of trying to climb the mountain of all reviewing
Mhm.
all of the boards, having some methodology where we would assign, I'll say, 5 metrics, and you pull those and we take the boards that perform worse on those and then send them to a next layer. Is that something that just conceivably would be possible?
Yeah, yeah, I don't see why not. Just given existing authorities' responsibilities, whether it's under Title II there or whether it's under the Legislative Audit Act, where we have pretty broad discretion, as does the Audit Committee in terms of what subjects they want to focus on. Um, yeah, I mean, this is all with the caveat that we do work for a committee. They're largely responsible for prioritizing the performance audit schedule and how we allocate work to the staff here. But just on the face of it in the moment, I don't see why they wouldn't give that due consideration if it was put in front of them.
Excellent. Questions from the rest of the subcommittee? All right. I see no questions, but I am gonna just kind of throw out there that Angus, I assume you are not going away. And if we were to come up with questions at some point in our process, we would be able to send them your way.
Yes, I'm happy to hang out here in your meeting for the rest of well, no, hopefully not all day, but for the remainder of the meeting. Also, you guys are free to contact me directly if you have any questions or funnel them through Aaron. We'll be happy to kind of keep tabs on what's going on and make sure we understand where what the direction is as this moves forward.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and
Yep.
we appreciate both the time and the memo. I thought the memo was quite interesting. So with that, Aaron, I will hand things back to you if you have a presentation for us.
Great. Yes, thank you, Chair Lloyd and committee. And again, thank you, Angus, for agreeing to speak to the committee this morning. I think nobody wants to duplicate efforts and do the opposite of what another group is doing at the same time. And so this was really helpful. Hopefully it was for me. Hopefully it was for everybody else. Okay, so I'm going to, if I can remember how to share my screen. Okay, I think I go here first. Okay, can everybody see my desktop? Yes, okay, perfect. Now, oh, I should go to the beginning of my presentation instead of the middle. Okay, so today we are going to talk about some other states' approaches. So again, for the record, my name is Erin Sullivan, policy analyst with the legal division at the Department of Labor and Industry, and lead staff for the Licensing Reform Task Force and this Sunset Subcommittee. So at the last meeting or during the organizational meeting, at one of the meetings, the subcommittee did request information on sunset reviews in other states. And so I'll just be walking through how other states conduct sunset reviews and what lessons might be useful for Montana. Okay. There we go. So I think everybody knows this, but just a quick review on what a sunset review is. So it's a systematic periodic assessment of an existing license, and then the legislature decides whether a license should continue unchanged, continue with modifications, or terminate. And many states attach an automatic sunset clause, which means the license expires unless the legislature reauthorizes it. And the whole goal of a sunset review is to evaluate public need, the benefits of regulation, and its costs. So just quick historic timeline of sunset reviews. So they really gained some momentum in the 1970s and expanded widely in the 1980s. And as we learned last week, of course, Montana was part of that, the thick of it in the late 1970s and early 80s. By the 80s, 36 states had passed some sort of sunset law. And then it started to kind of peter off a little bit. And in the 90s, several states either repealed entirely or scaled back their systems. And then from the 2000s onward, what states have really kind of shifted toward is more of a targeted program evaluation rather than broad automatic reviews. So here's just a graphic that illustrates the variation in the sunset laws across the states. And you can see on the key, the dark blue states, which is about half of them, I didn't count, but it is about half of them, have active sunset laws right now in some form or another. The middle blue, so Minnesota, Illinois, Kentucky, this color blue, those are there are laws on the books, but they are inactive. They're not being utilized. And then the light blue ones are all of the states that have actually repealed sunset laws. The gray, just there never has been a sunset law in place. So there's generally 5 types of reviews that states utilize. So a comprehensive review is a review of all statutory agencies. And you can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, like 7 or 8 states that have comprehensive reviews. The next one down is a regulatory review, and that focuses on licensing and regulatory bodies. And you can see the handful of states that have regulatory reviews. And then selective seems to be the most popular. Those target specific agencies or professions. And so occupational licensing is obviously a big part of the selective review type. And then there's discretionary reviews, and that's where a review board actually chooses its targets. And then a clausal one is a system that relies on individual statutory sunset clauses. And so you can see I put Montana in here because the legislature has the authority to include a sunset provision in new programs. And there's a couple of them that actually do both. I'm trying to see which ones. There was a couple. You can look through the list, but some of them have multiple processes or multiple types of reviews. So when we are contemplating potential sunset provisions back in Montana, these are 5 design components that we should consider. So, and I'll go through each one of these in a little bit more detail in the next slides, but where the process is housed, the statutory criteria to use, how frequently reviews should occur, what the review methodology would include, and how the findings flow to the legislature. So each of these choices obviously shape the effectiveness of the process. So component 1, where the process is housed. So states place their sunset processes in several types of institutions, and it's hard to do an apple to apple comparison because everyone's their branches of government are kind of set up differently. And so where we have licensing boards that are administratively attached to the Department of Labor, there's other states that have licensing boards that are independent entities. And so it is kind of hard to do a true comparison on them, but these are just kind of the options that can be included. So obviously the legislative branch, there's interim committees. Some states have standing committees that actually meet during the interim. The membership doesn't change. So some of the reviews could go to an interim or standing committee. The legislative administrative committee, so what we call legislative council, that could be an option, and they could obviously designate a subcommittee. The audit division, as we used to have, fiscal division, there is a state, I can't remember which one, that actually has the fiscal division do the reviews, or staff from the services division. And then for the executive branch, there's, the actual state agencies could do the review. There could be an agency that's dedicated to these types of reviews, like a regulatory oversight agency. Colorado is an example of that, where they have their Department of Regulatory Affairs, I think is what it's called, is an actual executive agency that they do all of the sunset reviews. Or it could be an independent state office. So an advisory council or a commission or even like the state auditor. I believe there's maybe one state that has a subset of the governor's office that actually does the review. So there's lots of different options and they kind of run around, depending on the state. But all the time we should consider when we're looking at potential options, staffing, budget, and then also interbranch coordination, because those all play major roles in selecting the best home for this process. So here's just some examples. So advisory committees, you can see there's about 4 states, and this is based on, there's the CSG, which is the Council of State Governments. They have this database called the Book of States. And and I can send everybody the link to that if you're interested in seeing it afterwards. But they have a database on sunset legislation, and it goes back like every few years. So I think this is as of what they had available as of 2023. So we've got about 4 states that use an advisory committee structure, 5 that use either legislative audit or research staff. Most of them do have a legislative committee that is acting directly and has the authority to review and make changes. There's a few, 5 or 6 with an independent commission, or outside reviewer. And then Connecticut actually is one that I found where it's the licensing board itself establishes a subcommittee to do the review. So the second component that we need to consider is the statutory criteria to evaluate each license. So the objective of a sunset is primarily to determine if continuation of licensing is necessary, and then also to a lesser extent to look for opportunities to modify the licensing program. So a strong sunset statute would ask several questions. Would public harm occur without regulation? And so would the unregulated practice of the occupation or profession create a direct, immediate hazard to the public health, safety, or welfare? Secondly, is the scope of practice clear? Is it readily identifiable and distinguishable from the scope of practice or other professions and occupations? Are training and qualifications justified? And does the occupation or profession require a specialized skill or training for which nationally recognized standards of education and training exist? Do the regulations deliver clear public benefits? Do they increase costs? And if so, are those costs justified? And then finally, is there public support for continuing the license? So just some examples that I pulled together. So Colorado has 4 criteria in its statutes, and it assesses whether regulation remains necessary, whether conditions have changed, and whether the current structure is the least restrictive consistent with public interest. Oh, I see a typo. Sorry. Okay, Texas has 5, and they examine whether the license protects a meaningful public interest, whether goals can be achieved through alternatives, and whether the process limits competition or impacts affordability. And so this middle one is a little unique, but does licensing process impede applicants with moderate or low incomes? And so the affordability and cost structure is important in Texas. Washington evaluates agency efficiency, duplication, performance outcomes, and the impact of potential termination. So you can see kind of a pattern. A lot of these are asked the same question, but in a little different way. And this one talks a lot about efficiency and performance metrics in Washington. And then Vermont has a lot in theirs, but what they do is they emphasize public interest complaint. So there's some compliance that's thrown into the Vermont provisions. So complaint history, training requirements, public participation, fiscal responsibility, and whether the regulatory entity has sufficient resources. So that's a lot to say those things. Okay, so component number 3, timelines and scheduling. So states, they approach scheduling differently. Everybody's got a different legislative process. Some attach automatic sunset clauses to each license, and others apply termination dates to entire boards. And many of the states use rotating schedules so that all the regulated entities are reviewed periodically. But it's really, state by state specific. But the choices should balance predictability with administrative capacity. So again, going back to when looking at designing this, what are the staffing needs, the budget needs, and time commitment and all of that. So here's some examples of review schedules. So Alabama is the one that I found that has the shortest review cycle, and it's every 4 years. And they actually review, they have 77 regulatory bodies that they review on a 4-year cycle. Arizona, it looks like Arizona, Illinois have 10 years. And then the rest of them are 6 years, except for Colorado's an outlier, which I can, what they do is they have for Colorado, it's up to 15 years between reviews for existing bodies. But then if it's a new program, then it's a 10-year review. So theirs is a little kind of varied. And then you can see that there's a couple that there's a range that's available. So Louisiana can be up to 6 years. Same with Tennessee and Oklahoma. Missouri is 6 years minimum, but not to exceed 12. And then Texas may not exceed 12 years. So there really isn't a right answer for what the time frame is. Again, going back to thinking about the capacity, the staffing, the budget, all of that kind of stuff should play a role in deciding what the time frame could be for a Montana sunset. So the next component is review methodology and report content. So most reviews include data collection and analysis of safety. And so this would be gathering quantitative and qualitative data on the occupation's impact on public safety and consumer protection, and assessing the economic implications of licensing, including costs to practitioners, benefits to the public. An alternative analysis. We saw that in the last meeting when we were going through what the sunset reviews looked like in Montana back in the 70s and 80s, that there was a review of the alternative pathways, I guess, or methods of licensing. And so reviewers should consider less restrictive alternatives before recommending continuation. So other regulatory measures could be like registration or accreditation, a voluntary certification program, or even enhanced industry and self-regulation. And then stakeholder engagement is critical. So practitioners, consumers, employers, and regulators, they all have different perspectives that should inform the final recommendation. And then the final recommendation should be, clear, evidence-based guidance to the legislature, obviously including rationale. Component 5 is reporting and legislative handling. So the final report should summarize the information obtained in the assessment and highlight the potential impacts of licensing, the occupation on public safety, consumer protection, and the economy. And the report should include a final recommendation to the legislature on licensing options. So states typically specify who receives the report, and then set deadlines and sometimes require that a report should be completed before continuation bills can be introduced. So for our purposes, suppose the sunset review reports are determined to be completed for presentation to a legislative review committee by September 1st, on the years prior to a legislative session. So if that was the case, the Economic Affairs Interim Committee may be an appropriate review committee. So an interim committee could do that in the interim before a session. Alternatively, the legislature could just establish a licensing review committee. So an independent committee to evaluate the reports, or like they did in the past, submit those to the legislative audit committee. So there's yeah, that's a big thing, is who's going to receive the report, and then obviously making sure that the deadlines actually match with our legislative deadlines. So just a couple state practices relevant to Montana. I guess it's just one. So Montana already uses sunset clauses in select statutes. Like I said earlier, the legislature has the ability to add a sunset provision to any legislation they want. And we actually saw an example of this in the last session when there was a bill for a new license for doulas, and that bill ended up and was a sunset provision was included. I can't remember what year it is. I think it's 2030 or 2031. So about 6 years is what the legislature decided, that they wanted to put a sunset provision on that license. And so there can be automatic sunset clauses. There's a lot of states that use this, or that have this ability. So, you can see Idaho, Michigan, Nebraska, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Virginia, and Wisconsin. But then the other states, they either implement termination dates for entire boards, or do the rotating review schedule. And so we do it on the actual license, or program, however you want to call it. But other states, could do just determination on the actual board. And I think that is a question that this committee is going to want to really look at, is what kind of review would it be? Would it be the board of XYZ terminating and everything underneath it, or would it be license XYZ terminating? So some implementation considerations for Montana. So these are some decision points again. So the home of the process, like where to house the process, what criteria to codify, how to schedule reviews, how transparent and participatory the process should be. That one is kind of an easy one to answer because we are a right to know state, and so everything we do in government is transparent. And then what report templates should be used, and how a continuation bill should be routed and timed. So the legislative workflow. And then we just need to make sure that we're aligning schedules with the legislative calendar. That is, I think, very important. So some operational guardrails just to consider. We want to avoid cliff effects, and so the reviews are timely, and so licenses that are actually needed aren't unintentionally terminated. We also want to work to try to prevent backlogs, and so this would be like prioritizing the list of licenses or boards to review, and setting some targets for staff. so we're not getting anybody inundated with all of this. We also want to keep in mind that we want to manage any conflicts of interest, and so lots of clear disclosure and independent reviewers, so it's not biased. And then also track KPIs or metrics such as the number of reviews, the share of the licenses that are continued or modified versus terminated, review timelines, cost savings, stakeholder satisfaction, just tracking all those metrics to see, is this process actually doing what it's intended to? Is it working? Should it, or is it going to be an instance like the 1970s where it was this great plan and it happened one time and then it was done? So just a quick summary, the goal for Sunset Reviews is to protect public safety and consumer welfare while minimizing unnecessary barriers. Reviews, they do test necessity, compare alternatives, provide other clear recommendations, either continue, modify, or terminate a program. And then we want to make sure we have clear processes, deadlines, reporting structures, because that helps ensure consistency and accountability. Okay, and that is all I have. So thank you for listening, and I will stop sharing now.
Thank you, Aaron. Again, I know from our last full meeting, you're probably getting a little tired of being thanked, but I just want to express appreciation that once again, this is very helpful information. I'm going to take an opportunity, and if you guys have questions, please raise your hand. But I think through that presentation, Aaron presented us with a lot of options that we as a group are going to need to navigate and make some decisions on. And to that end, I've been working with Aaron and a few others to pull together a survey of the group just to get some initial thoughts on some of those questions, because I think to date we've had a few of us have talked a lot, and a few of you have talked a little. And so before we get into a discussion and make decisions, I just wanted to create an opportunity for each individual to submit their thoughts into our process. And I guess the other two things that I would throw out there is that the survey is not complete. It's not gonna have a question. It's not gonna answer all the questions we need to answer. Won't be included. And the survey is also not making our final decision. It's simply intended as a method to get individual thoughts before we have a group discussion. With that, Tanner, I see your hand is raised.
I guess I'm the guy with the questions today. Thanks for that, Aaron. My curiosity, I'm wondering if you've seen this in other states. Obviously, sunset provisions, focus on licenses in some states. Do they focus on like requirements under licenses, kind of like barriers to work type elements? Did you see anything that was kind of more narrowly tailored to that, or was it largely just boards or licenses overall?
Thank you, Chair Lloyd and Tanner. So I think that they do look at those types of things. I think the overall criteria that is expressed in statute usually is, looking at public safety and all of that, least restrictive alternatives. But I do know Colorado actually is probably the best example. They do very comprehensive reviews, regardless of what it is, if it's an agency or if it's a board or a license or whatever, and they will come back with modifications. And so I think modifications is probably the best alternative or recommendation, because unless it's very glaring that it's not required. It's not necessary, or like Vermont, was it Vermont that had all of those? They look at, are there even any complaints that are coming in for this license, and what's the discipline look like? I mean, does it matter? Could this be regulated just through regular consumer protection laws or something like that? But I do know that Colorado has, when they put out their reports, and they're long, they're very lengthy reports, but they do a cost benefit analysis. They do all of the all of the review requirements or requirement review, excuse me, and say, hey, this license needs to stay in effect, but the continuing education is isn't necessary, or we need to change the qualifications or the standards accordingly. So then it's all recommendations to the legislature for at least Colorado. But yes, to answer your question.
Thank you.
That's a good question. Others? Does anybody else have a Gail? I see your hand is raised.
So, Aaron touched on staffing and budget, which I think is a very important aspect of the sunset. And it seems to me like this is or could be a huge amount of work. And I'm wondering, can that work be incorporated into normal staff schedules? Has it in other states required additional hiring of staff? And I don't know that that's really a question because that may be something that you don't have an answer to or a sense of, but more of a comment than anything that even a lesser level of review takes a fairly significant amount of work, it seems. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gail, for that. So I do know that it really depends on where it's housed. And so I went to a conference last summer and listened to Colorado and Utah, and they both have very robust reviews. They have dedicated staff that do it. Like I said, Colorado has DORA is what they call their agency, but it's the Department of Regulatory Affairs, and they do other things. They don't just do sunset reviews for occupational licensing, but they are the oversight agency basically for the executive branch in Colorado, and so that's in their budget. It's that is what they have folks that do these reviews. Utah is kind of similar. They have, I think it's a division within one of their, I don't remember which agency it is, but they do, but they have actual FTE that do this. So those two, just because I heard them speak, that's why I know those. As far as the other states, I really think that it would depend on who is charged with the reviews. So, but that's a very good thing to point out and consider, that the more robust the review, the more criteria, the more parameters you put around a potential sunset law, is likely going to require more staff time and resources that the entity may or may not have. So it could require a request for appropriations.
Thank you.
Aaron, if I could just ask, and I think we lost Mr. Bragg. He might be the most likely person to answer this question, but do we know how much time the department puts towards the current report that goes to the governor every 2 years? That might be a good starting place for some of this conversation of time investment.
I don't know the answer to that, and Kevin did have to drop off. There's a board meeting starting in 7 minutes, and so I know he's there. I can shoot him a quick question though, and just see. And because I don't know if like that is data collection that they they obviously compile it like throughout the 18 months and then put the report together. But yeah, it is his division that puts together that report.
And that doesn't have to happen today. It's just a piece of information that would likely be helpful to the group.
Okay.
Other questions from the group?
If I could, Alan,
Of course.
the survey, I know you touched on it briefly, but unless people have other questions on my presentation, that is something that we worked on this week, and it should be about ready to distribute. So hopefully, I can get that distributed to the committee this afternoon, hopefully this afternoon. But if you want to maybe talk through kind of what your vision is on that, the results of that, when you'd like it back, the data back and all of that, that would be helpful.
It's fantastic, and I have to look at my email because I sent you thoughts on that I don't have at my fingertips. I just intent wise, my intent behind surveying the group is truly just to get information from everybody that is on the subcommittee. And I think intent wise, ideally the survey goes out either today or next week. And then if we could have folks complete it by May 8th, that would then give us an opportunity to review the results the week before our next meeting, just to kind of try and have that ahead of time so that then if you look at our schedule, that next meeting really is where we need to start going from learning to deciding on things. And so um, I greatly appreciate the information we've received to date, and I think it helps us with our decisions. But the real work of this group, I think, is going to, start in our next meeting. And so, intent-wise, just trying to get some information to see where the group is. I anticipate there's going to be some gap between where we are on some of the questions. But just getting an idea so that when we start the conversation, we know, what topics are going to take more time versus the ones where we might have some more consensus.
Okay.
Any other questions or thoughts on other states' approaches? Hearing none, the next item on our agenda is outstanding issues, identify further issues, and instructions to staff. I think we mixed some of that in with our last topic, but I would open the floor if others have questions or thoughts to add to that agenda item. Hearing none, our next meeting's Friday, May 22nd, again at 9 a.m. And then we have June 19th and July 31st as the other meetings on our calendar. With that, I'm going to ask one last time before we go to public comment if anybody has thoughts or questions. All right, seeing none, I'm going to read the statement and then hand things over to the staff to navigate us through the public hand-raising process. The subcommittee now offers the public in attendance an opportunity to comment on any public matter under the jurisdiction of the subcommittee that is not on the current agenda. The subcommittee cannot act, but will listen to comments and may ask staff to place the issue on a future agenda. The chair may limit the comment period to proceed with the subcommittee's meeting. Public commenters should state their first and last names when offering comments.
Thank you. If anybody in attendance would like to provide public comment to this committee, please raise your hand. We have a very quiet group. Nope, nobody raised their hand.
All right, with that, I guess we move to adjourn, and I thank everybody for your time and attention today, and look forward to seeing your responses to the survey and continuing to work on a recommendation for this group.
Thank you all.